The rope burned through Marisol Vega's palms as she dangled 30 feet above American soil. The border wall swaying beneath her weight, like a vertical bridge between desperation and hope that was already crumbling before she reached the ground. Below, the others had formed a human cushion to catch those still descending. Above, the last climber struggled with fear-frozen limbs. And somewhere in the Mexican darkness they left behind, the coyotes were already counting their money and deleting phone numbers, their part in this tragedy complete before the real nightmare began. When Marisol's feet finally touched Arizona dirt, she thought the hardest part was over. They'd scaled the impossible wall, conquered the metal monument to division, made it to America. But as the 7 of them huddled in the promised meeting spot, waiting for the van that would never come, she began to understand that climbing the wall had been the easy part. Surviving what came after, abandoned in the desert with no guides, no transportation, no idea which direction led to salvation. That was a real test. The journey to that rope ladder had begun 6 months earlier in San Salvador, in the coffee shop Marisol managed for her uncle. The extortion demands came with morning deliveries, tucked between invoices like casual threats. Pay or burn. Join or die. The amounts grew weekly, impossible mathematics that meant choosing between protection money and employee salaries, between gang peace and eating. Her breaking point came not with threats to herself, but to her teenage daughter, Lucia. The gang members started noticing her walking to school, commenting on her beauty, suggesting she was old enough for certain types of work. The message was clear. Pay, provide your daughter, or lose everything in ways that made death seem merciful. Within a week, Marisol had liquidated everything. The savings account meant for Lucia's university became travel funds. Her mother's jewelry became cash. The small apartment became someone else's home. $20,000 assembled from a lifetime of careful saving and desperate borrowing, enough for 2 passages to safety. The Coyote network came recommended through her church, people who'd successfully sent relatives north. They specialized in family crossings, understanding that mothers with children needed different handling than single men. The main contact called himself Ramon, projecting competence with his neat clothes and business-like manner. He showed photos of successful crossings, families reunited in American cities, children in school uniforms living the dreams their parents had purchased. $12,000 for both of them. The price included everything: safe houses, guides, transportation from the border to Los Angeles, where Marisol's cousin waited. They'd cross at a remote section of Arizona where the new wall had gaps, where surveillance was minimal, where dozens crossed nightly without incident. 3 days from San Salvador to new life. Lucia took the separation harder than expected. At 15, she understood the danger but resented the disruption. Her friends, her school, her carefully constructed teenage world, all sacrificed for safety she wished they didn't need. She blamed Marisol for not paying the gangs, for not finding another way, for choosing flight over fight. The bus ride north was silent accusation punctuated by worried mothering. In Mexico City, they joined their crossing group, 7 people total. Themselves, a young couple from Honduras, a Guatemalan man traveling alone, and 2 brothers from El Salvador who looked barely out of their teens. The safe house was actually safe, with separate rooms for families and working locks. Ramon's organization showed in these details, suggesting the high price bought real service. The journey to the border took a week, moving in comfortable vans during daylight, staying in decent motels at night, no walking through desert or hiding in truck beds. This was premium smuggling, worth the extra cost for those who could afford it. Lucia gradually thawed, even making friends with a Honduran woman, who was only a few years older but already married, already fleeing violence that made teenage problems seem trivial. At the staging area in Sonoita, just south of the Arizona border, they met the crossing specialists, different men than those who'd guided them through Mexico, harder and more focused. They explained the plan with military precision. The wall here was 30 feet high, but climbable with proper equipment. They approached at 2 a.m. when Border Patrol shifts changed. Rope ladders would be in place. Climb quickly, drop carefully, move to the designated meeting spot. A van would collect them within minutes, before sensors or patrols detected the crossing. They showed videos on a phone, Previous groups scaling the wall successfully, dropping into America, disappearing into waiting vehicles. It looked rehearsed, professional, proof that $12,000 bought expertise. The wall was just an obstacle, not a barrier. People crossed here nightly. Border Patrol couldn't be everywhere. Technology had blind spots. Success was virtually guaranteed. The night of crossing came moonless and perfect. They walked for 2 hours through Sonoran Desert, guided by men who knew every rock and cactus. Marisol held Lucia's hand, feeling her daughter's pulse through sweaty palms. The girl had stopped complaining, understanding finally that this wasn't adventure but survival, that her mother had chosen the only option that didn't end with her in a brothel. The wall appeared suddenly, looming out of darkness like a metal tsunami frozen mid-crash. 30 feet of steel bollards filled with concrete, topped with anti-climb panels, stretching endlessly in both directions. Impossible to imagine scaling without equipment, but the rope ladders were already in place as promised, dropped by someone on the American side, professional and sturdy. The young husband went first, climbing quickly to show it could be done. His wife followed, slower but determined, then the Guatemalan man, the Salvadoran brothers, all disappearing over the top like reverse rain. Marisol and Lucia were last, the guides insisting families cross together for safety. Climbing was harder than it looked. The ropes swayed with each movement. The wall's metal was cold and slippery with desert dew. 30 feet vertical felt like 300 when you couldn't see the ground. Lucia climbed above her, young muscles managing better than Marisol's 40-year-old body. Halfway up, Marisol's arms began burning. 3/4, her legs shook with effort. But stopping meant falling, and falling meant everything was for nothing. At the top, straddling the wall between countries, Marisol experienced a moment of pure vertigo. Not just physical, but existential. Balance between the life she'd known and the unknown existence ahead. Below on the Mexican side, the guides were already removing evidence, preparing to disappear. Below on the American side, the others waited to catch them, having made their own leaps of faith. The drop was controlled falling. Lucia first, caught by waiting arms. Then Marisol, trying to protect her phone and documents while trusting strangers to break her fall. The impact jarred every bone, but she was down, was in America, had made across the impossible barrier. They'd done it. The hardest part was over, except it wasn't. The meeting spot was 50 yards from the wall, marked by a distinctive rock formation. They reached it quickly, adrenaline overcoming exhaustion. Huddled together in the shadow of ancient stones, 7 people waited for salvation in the form of a van with California plates. 5 minutes, the guides had said. 10 at most. Just stay quiet and still. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. No van appeared. No headlights pierced the darkness. No engine sounds broke the desert silence. Just 7 people slowly realizing they'd been abandoned in the American desert with no guides, no transportation, no plan beyond climbing a wall that now trapped them on the wrong side of survival. The Honduran woman started crying first. Quiet sobs that grew louder as reality set in. Her husband tried to comfort her, but his own voice shook with barely controlled panic. The Guatemalan man walked in circles, muttering prayers or curses. The Salvadoran brother sat in stunned silence, perhaps remembering warnings they'd ignored about coyotes who took money and vanished. Lucia looked at Marisol with eyes that said everything. This was her fault, her choice, her failure. They'd traded the dangers of San Salvador for the dangers of Arizona desert. Gangsters with names for nature without mercy. At least in El Salvador they'd known the threats. Here, everything was hostile and unknown. Marisol felt her carefully constructed motherhood cracking. She was supposed to have answers, solutions, the adult wisdom that made sense of chaos. Instead, she stood in foreign darkness with 6 other abandoned souls. Her daughter's future is uncertain as their location. The $12,000 had bought them across a wall, but nothing more. They were in America, but might as well have been on the moon. The group argued about direction. North seemed logical, but which way was north? The wall ran east-west, but curved and angled. Stars provided navigation if you knew how to read them, which none of them did. Walking risked detection by Border Patrol, but staying meant certain capture when daylight came. Every option seemed wrong, every choice potentially fatal. Finally, they chose movement over paralysis. The Guatemalan man claimed to see lights in the distance, a town, a road, something. They walked toward it in a ragged line, Marisol gripping Lucia's hand like a lifeline. The desert at night was alien terrain, full of sound that might be wind or animals or Border Patrol vehicles. Every step took them further from the wall, but not necessarily closer to safety. After an hour, the Honduran woman collapsed. Exhaustion, dehydration, the emotional toll of abandonment. Her body simply stopped cooperating. Her husband begged her to continue, but she'd reached her limit. The group faced an impossible choice: leave her behind or wait for capture together. Common humanity won. They stopped, shared what little water they had, tried to revive her strength. That's when they saw the lights. Not distant town glow, but approaching vehicles, bouncing over rough terrain. Border Patrol, probably drawn by sensors or routine sweeps. The group scattered instinctively before realizing the futility. Where could they run in open desert? How could they hide when infrared cameras made darkness irrelevant? But Marisol couldn't let it end this way. Not after everything. The savings, the journey, the wall. She pulled Lucia behind a large boulder, pressing them both flat against the ground. Maybe the vehicles would pass. Maybe they were looking for others. Maybe God or fate or blind luck would give them one more chance. The light swept past their hiding spot, illuminating other members of their group. The Honduran couple, too exhausted to run. The Guatemalan man, standing with hands raised in surrender. The brothers, trying to flee, but outlined clearly against the desert floor. One by one, caught in light and custody, their American dreams ending before they'd properly begun. Marisol and Lucia remained hidden, barely breathing, as agents processed the others. Professional efficiency, no violence, just a routine collection of people who'd risked everything and lost. The Honduran woman needed medical attention. The men were cuffed with plastic ties. Everyone loaded into vehicles that would take them to detention, deportation, the end of their stories. When the convoy finally left, mother and daughter emerged from hiding, alone now in the vast desert, their situation even more desperate, but also possibly more hopeful. 2 people could hide better than 7. A mother and daughter might evoke sympathy that a group couldn't. They still had each other, even if they had nothing else. They walked through night, Marisol navigating by instinct and prayer. Lucia had stopped crying, stopped blaming, moved into numb acceptance of someone too young for such experiences. They shared the last of their water, ate the energy bars Marisol had hidden in her bra, kept moving because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant everything had been for nothing. Dawn revealed they'd been walking in circles, the walls still visible in the distance, their footprints creating patterns in the sand like indecisive art. But sunrise also showed a road, actual asphalt with actual traffic. Not Border Patrol, but civilians heading to work, living normal lives in the abnormal borderlands. The decision to approach the road was another leap of faith. They could be reported, arrested, treated as criminals, or they could find help, compassion, the America that existed in dreams, if not always reality. Marisol chose hope because the alternative was dying in the desert, and she hadn't climbed a 30-foot wall to give up now. The first 3 vehicles passed without stopping. The fourth, a pickup driven by an older Mexican-American man, slowed and pulled over. He looked at them, dusty, exhausted, obviously fresh from crossing, and made his own choice. "Get in," he said in Spanish. "Quick, before someone sees." He drove them to Tucson, asking no questions, offering water and silence. At a bus station, he handed Marisol $200 and a blessing. "Go with God," he said. "Be careful. Trust no one, but help everyone." The paradox of immigrant life condensed into roadside philosophy. From Tucson, they traveled by Greyhound to Los Angeles. 2 days of tension at every stop, expecting immigration agents who never appeared. Lucia slept against Marisol's shoulder, 15 years old and aged beyond measure. They'd made it to America, But at what cost? The wall had been climbed, but the trauma remained. Invisible barriers that no ladder could scale. Marisol's cousin received them with tears and warnings. Immigration enforcement was increasing. Work was harder to find. The community lived in constant fear of raids. The America they'd reached wasn't the America they'd imagined. But it was still better than gangsters claiming daughters, than choosing between extortion and starvation. Survival, even diminished, beat the alternatives. They found a small apartment, shared with another family. Marisol found work cleaning offices at night, invisible labor for invisible people. Lucia enrolled in school under documents that wouldn't bear scrutiny, learning English and algebra while carrying deportation fear like an extra textbook. They built routines that looked like life on the outside, but the abandonment at the wall haunted them both. The moment of realizing coyotes had vanished, that $12,000 had bought only partial service. The scattered group, caught one by one in desert spotlights. The randomness of who escaped and who didn't. The rope ladder that had seemed like salvation, but was really just the beginning of harder climbs. Marisol never learned what happened to Ramon, the well-dressed coyote who'd taken their money, probably recruiting new clients, showing the same videos, making the same promises. The border was full of such entrepreneurs, selling hope to the desperate, delivering just enough to maintain credibility. Some groups made it to waiting vans. Others were abandoned to figure out America on their own. Business model based on calculated cruelty. 3 years later, they still lived in Los Angeles, still undocumented but established. Lucia had graduated high school, started community college, built a life that justified the journey's trauma. She'd forgiven Marisol, understanding finally that some choices aren't really choices, that mothers do impossible things for imperfect outcomes. Sometimes Marisol dreamed about the wall, not climbing it, but standing on top, balanced between worlds, seeing clearly in both directions. The Mexico they fled with its specific dangers. The America they'd found with different threats. The rope ladder swaying beneath her, reminder that even the sturdiest plans could leave you hanging. She'd paid $12,000 to cross a border, had climbed 30 feet of impossible wall, had been abandoned in the desert with her teenage daughter, had survived through luck and kindness and the stubborn refusal to let the coyotes' betrayal be the end of their story. The rope ladder had held their weight. Everything after had been free fall, caught only by their own determination. The wall still stood, growing higher and more sophisticated each year. But people still climbed it, still paid coyotes who might or might not complete their contracts, still dropped into America, hoping for vans that might or might not appear. The mathematics of desperation remained constant. Any chance beat no chance, even when the odds included abandonment. Marisol Vega had crossed the border using a rope ladder that burned her palms and delivered her to abandonment. But she'd also found the older Mexican-American man who'd driven them to safety, had discovered that America contained both cruelty and kindness, often in the same day, had learned that climbing walls was easier than building lives, but both were possible with enough persistence. The coyotes had vanished with their money. The wall remained to mock other dreamers. But Marisol and Lucia had become American in the truest sense, not through documents but through endurance, not by birthright but by the right of those who'd risked everything and survived to tell about it. The rope ladder had been just the beginning. Everything after had been the real climb.